own power behind them. So I think we can do that today. Why don't you kick us off?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the first one that we've got that we looked at was an article published by ThreatPost, and it's CyberSpike. Basically, saying that organizations have suffered 925 attacks per week, which is an all-time high. And so, just kind of a quick overview. And once again, the link to these articles are going to be in the show notes, so you'll be able to go and look at them yourself. But so the study showed that last year there was an increase in weekly cyber attacks globally to an average of about 925 attacks per week, and they said that that's up 50% from the previous year. But they also noted that the Log4j attacks were a major contributor to that number and to that increase. And so, with that, as you read through the article, what are your quick takes on that, John?
Sure. I think this a lot ties back into what we've discussed in previous episodes, where more and more of these the people that are doing ransomware and these attacks are treating this as a business. So the more that we see in the news that companies are kind of paying out the ransom, the more that, and again, you don't have to have proximity. You can be all the way across the globe to produce this and make money fairly easily. I think that you're going to continue to see an increase until we get better with business operational process, better technical implementation and technical security, and as well as the payouts stop. Once people stop making money at something, you see there's going to be an evolution, I'm sure, to something else. But we'll stop seeing some of these these attacks this way. But there's no end in sight. I do not think there's an end in sight right now with the trajectory of this continuing to go up.
No, and I completely agree with you. Just for the simple fact of, I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is one of the things that we talk about at nauseum, is that people aren't giving cybersecurity the due credit that it deserves, because it's one of those things where a lot of business executives, and for all you guys out there, you might fall into this category where, they think, oh, I'm in the cloud, so I don't have to worry about cybersecurity, or I've got an IT guy, so I don't have to worry about cybersecurity, or I'm too small to be a target. And so none of that stuff that happened that I see in the news, none of that stuff will happen to me. And those are all valid thought processes until it does happen to you. And then it becomes well, oh my goodness, I should have been paying attention. And so, the reason why we put together these shows and talk about this stuff is to bring awareness so that you start paying attention now and early. As we looked into the article itself, and as I was going through it, and if you scroll up a little bit more so we can actually see the graph, one of the things, or down a little bit more, my apologies, but one of the things that I saw, when we look at they broke them down by industry, it was very staggering to me that education and research was by far the number one targeted sector. But as we also look at the supply chain issues that we've been having, manufacturing made the list with averaging 704 attacks a week. Retail and wholesale organizations made the list with 526 attacks a week. And then transportation. So you trucking and logistics companies out there, you guys made the list, hitting at 501 attacks a week. And so that just goes to show that criminals are treating this like a business, and they're equal opportunists. They don't care who you are. If you're a business, regardless of what it is that you do, you can be a victim, and they're coming after you.
I actually have a question for you with this, very specific to the industry sector. I would have expected government military to have been number one, quite frankly, because the information that you can get when we're talking about those advanced persistent threats, where these other foreign nations that have the firepower to be able to go breach into a network and sit and park themselves and gather as much intel as they want, would be extremely valuable. Why do you think that education and research itself, unless you're talking maybe IP theft, and again, this is conjecture, why do you think that's so far outdistanced all the other ones with the way that this article, based on the research of this article?
So I think two things. One, and you just touched on one, IP theft. When you talk about research developments and organizations that are doing heavy in research, that IP, priceless. And so that's one. But two, and this is something that we touched on in one of our previous episodes, as you alluded to, and I didn't think about it until after you had said it, but, our school systems are the biggest employers in the country. Regardless of what city or state that you live in, think of how many people are employed by the school systems. So if I'm a criminal and I'm looking to steal as many identities as I can and then go and sell them on the dark web, or, utilize that information to create targeted spear phishing attacks and things of that nature, well, what better place to go than I can get, kids who aren't, their social security numbers and their personal information isn't being monitored in most cases by most people. So I've got fresh identities that I can steal there, and then I've got all the employers, I've got all of their medical records, all their sensitive information. I mean, prime candidates and prime targets. And so when you think about it, it's a treasure trove of information that typically isn't well secured, and so low hanging fruit here.
Okay.
I think that's the reason why it's number one on the list.
Yeah, and as a tease, our last article is kind of surrounding some stuff related to schools and ransomware very specifically that happened recently. No, it makes that totally makes sense. I can see low hanging fruit being a big part of going. Hey, this may be where there's the most open vulnerabilities at, and looking at government second. Lots of legacy systems. You're trying to shift it.
100%.
You're trying to shift the Titanic. And from personal experience, I've seen where programs that have been in place 10 or 15 years, the initial dev process of that was get something up with like two people involved drinking wine. That's actually a legitimate story. If anybody hears this that knows that story, I'll save names. But I have been told stories of that because you get all these little stovepipe, very segmented areas. Of note, particularly when you start going down further, then they start breaking down this article by region. And African nations, were almost 3 times as likely compared to the United States as having one of these breaches occur. Again, kind of what's your thought process on what specifically in Africa it would make them such a large target for based on a percentage increase, or even not percentage, but just based on the number of targets based on North America or Europe, which quite frankly traditionally are your richer countries.
Because I think it's just, once again, low hanging fruit. When you think about the development and everything that's going on in Africa, I mean, there's a lot of big corporations that are starting to build and do developments over in that country, which is great. But here's the thing: they lack the maturity. So the technology infrastructure isn't as strong and robust as what you're going to find in the United States and throughout Europe. And so not only that, there's a lack of security infrastructure in place, but there's also a lack of awareness. And so it's much easier to trick somebody who's not even looking and isn't aware that the attack and the threat exists and that it's coming.
The other thing that I thought about this as we've reviewed this article, and I remember reading it, earlier in the week, was how many people, when we talk about the supply chain, may have partners or may have locales based in those countries, and that's an entry point into other areas because of maybe lack of the complexity and lack of the polish that may be in other places when it comes to around security and the operational procedures. That's something else that kind of popped into my head that is that a gateway if they found a gateway into where other places are at that may not have the perimeter security necessary.
I think all of them are opportunities. I think that criminals nowadays they're equal opportunists. As soon as they get in, they're looking for different ways. How can I spider my way throughout this thing and land into larger organizations or go upstream and inflict more damage? And so that's just the nature of the beast.
I have been waiting